Okay, my name is Chris Malati, and I welcome you all to the October 2022 Cascade Mycological Society meeting. A few announcements before I introduce Jack Johnson, our invited guest tonight. If people aren't aware, the Mount Pisgah Arboretum Mushroom Festival is on the last Sunday of the month, 1 week from this Sunday, October 30th. It's a limited ticketed event. There's only 3,600 tickets sold. I have no idea if they're still left or not. You'd have to check on the website. And then we have a couple of things coming up after the mushroom show. The introduction to wild mushroom identification class, which is through the Eugene Parks and Open Space, is going on. And then the next day, there's a fall family foray that Molly and I lead from here to another park. And then on the 9th, the adult introductory foray, again through the Eugene Parks and Recreation Department. So Jack Johnson's our invited guest tonight. Jack graduated from the University of Western Washington with a degree in molecular biology. He's a board member of the Northwest Mushroomers Association and volunteers for the Fungal Diversity Survey, also called FunDiS. He assists with FunDiS West Coast Rare Fungal Challenge and DNA sequencing, and he's currently working with a grant from the Stuntz Foundation sequencing fungi in the Northwest. Please welcome Jack Johnson, tonight's guest speaker.
Thank you, Chris. Let me pop up my presentation here. Okie dokie. Well, thanks for having me. It is a pleasure to be presenting to you all. I just met Chris and Molly at the Key Council meeting a few weeks ago, and it was nice to meet our regional mycologists and get to know some members of Cascade Myco. Just want to say I really appreciate that your club puts your lectures and your meetings out for the world to see. It's something that I found early on in my career. I found your meetings and I was able to learn about things I wouldn't otherwise, like Labubeniales with Patty Kaishin, and yeah, it's really great. All righty, so tonight I just want to share with you something about fungi that just eternally excites me. A lot of you go out in the woods, I'm sure, and you have a bunch of things you see regularly. You become accustomed with where to look for your chanterelles, your boletes, whatever it may be. Tonight I want to share a bunch of little places you can look for fungi living in unusual ways, in unusual pockets. One of my favorite quotes I have heard on this topic is that there is no unfilled niche. And I think, or I hope tonight's presentation will illustrate that for you all. So cryptic niches or niches, there's a right way to say it. I'm not too interested in figuring out which way it is. Unusual fungi and where to find them. So I just want to start off with setting a precedent of why I want to give this talk. Not only is it something that really is fun, but it's meaningful. It's scientifically important. So I found, I was looking for literature talking about small niches, small organisms, and survey methods. And basically, it seems to me that smaller things are underobserved or missed. And I found an article that summarized the findings of 59 plant survey studies. And you can see my mouse here, I think. The findings of this were aimed at how we can make our survey practices better, how we can better inventory biodiversity. And it was found out of 59 studies that about 92% of them had errors in the species they found. So these surveys were at sites where the inventory of plants was already taken, and they tested different surveying methods and different surveyors to see how close to the inventory that was very complete they could get. And we all are familiar with getting names wrong with fungi. That's something I do frequently. It's part of the game. And what stunned me was that the errors of misidentification were a much smaller factor of missing the total inventory than overlooking things, simply not noticing them at all. Anywhere from 3 to 6 times more of the errors were attributed to overlooking something than misidentifying. And people could vary in these studies. They found anywhere, often 25 to 50% different total numbers of species were listed, but it could be anywhere to 300%. So drastically different results. And this is where people like you all come in. If you are going out in the woods and you want to document your finds on iNaturalist, you can help fill in gaps. It's when you look for these less obvious niches, it can be more impactful data. And to illustrate that, I just wanted to show a couple of things from our region. Most of the things in this talk tonight will be from our region, and I'll show you how you can tell that later on. But here's on iNaturalist, just research grade observations of Fomitopsis ochracea. This used to be Fomitopsis panicola, and in our area, panicola was broken into two things, Fomitopsis ochracea here and Fomitopsis mountsiae. Mountsiae is much more common. Regionally, in my findings, it is. And ochracea is less common. And you can see here that 579 observations are what we come up with. And the point I want to illustrate is that this is a polypore that's in your face. It's big, it's apparent, and although it's not the more common species, it's out there, and people are finding it. And compare that to a species which is, in my experience, much more abundant. That is a Heterobasidion species. So this is all Heterobasidion research grade on iNaturalist. And the point I want to show here is Heterobasidion, instead of being a big shelf that you can see, it grows under logs and cracks. And so just that small difference of it tends to grow in places that are a little less convenient to look, but it's abundant. We only have 18 research grade observations for this region of the Pacific Northwest, which I think illustrates that, we need to look in these obscure places or just places that require us to bend over. And those kinds of observations are very much needed. So some terminology just for the presentation, and some thoughts on what we're seeing here. These things that I'm about to share, some of them are uncommon, some of them are rare, but all of them pretty much are overlooked. And overlooked is not the same as uncommon. A lot of these are extremely abundant that I'm going to share, but just rarely observed. And a lot of them are small. They have small visible fruiting structures, but that does not play into them being a small part of their ecosystem. Studies on crust fungi, which are often just overlooked, one, because they're hard to ID, but two, because they grow in obscure places, have shown that they're some of the most ubiquitous fungi in the forest. If I remember right, a study in the Bay Area by Tom Bruns showed that crust fungi, that mode of life, which is many different areas in kingdom fungi form crusts, were the most common thing they found in the forest, but they're one of the least observed. And then if you see this star, and I put them in the bottom left corner of every slide, that's something you can find in the Pacific Northwest. So if you're looking at this presentation and you just want to jot down the things you could personally look for that star, and it'll help you to make a list of things to look out for. So the first category, the unusual niche I want to share, is floral mimicry. There's a slew of fungi that imitate plants in one way or another, and they're called fungal pseudoflowers very often. And as you can see, they're in very different areas of Dicaria, which is Basidiomycota and Ascomycota. It's a convergently evolved strategy, just meaning that it's a good enough strategy to where different groups of fungi came to the same conclusion. And so these things I'm going to show you, they're not only looking like plants, but if you were an insect, a lot of them smell like plants. they produce similar volatile compounds, which are often what attracts a lot of insects, along with UV coloration of petals. So yeah, the ecology of some of these is really well worked out. They attract pollinators. The ecology of some of them are in progress. The first of which grows on Xyris surinamensis, and I had the privilege of working with a researcher who's trying to pin down this ecology in Guyana, South America. We set up little bottles and sucked the air. We would, in the field, put little bottles on top of the pseudoflowers and suck up the volatiles, and we'll see what her conclusions are pretty soon here. This is an unparasitized plant. So these are the flowers. This is very abundant. Xyris is a genus which you will see all over the Southwest, South Central, the tropics, lots of species. But on 3 of those species, you will sometimes see this, a Fusarium xyrophyllum, which manages to transform the flower structure. And that's all fungal tissue. That's not plant tissue whatsoever. Transform it into a pseudoflower. And in the field, at a distance, it takes a while to even notice they're there. They're very convincing, very interesting. They were discovered in an herbarium after someone was going through Xyris collections, and only recently described, I think the last 10 years or so. Yeah, these are really neat. I spent so much time in the open white sand tide pool, or not tide pool, but pools of water and white sand habitat in Guyana, looking at these and studying them. Really, really neat organism. And bonkers that this thing manages to do this. I don't know about you, but I'm just baffled by pretty much everything I'm sharing tonight. So you have a pseudoflower from Fusarium, which is a common bread mold. It's the only Fusarium that does anything like this, to our knowledge. There are a lot of other phytopathogen, plant pathogen Fusarium. However, none of them, to our knowledge, make these interesting pseudoflowers. So another pseudoflower structure here I'm about to show grows on these Vocera species. This is in the mustard family. And it transforms this foliage. So get a look at this and just note the color. Note the color here. These are a few different species. You can find these in Washington, Oregon, BC. And sometimes from a distance, you think you might see one flowering. But in reality, it is a rust fungus, Puccinia monoica, that has grown onto the plants and transformed it to look as if there's a flower. You can see it almost looks like a bud here, but this is just fused leaves and the yellow colorations produced by the Puccinia. And it also produces volatiles that mimic the plant's volatiles. So a pollinator might come by and see these, or smell these compounds and stop for a sniff. And that's how this thing spreads its spores. Of course, with rusts, they aren't spreading to the same plant. They're looking for an alternate host. Rusts will often jump from little shrubby things, members of Rosaceae or mustard family, to conifer trees. This baffled me. And when I found this, well, I didn't find it. My friend Connor Dooley did. When he found this, he had just been talking about it a few minutes before. It's really great when that kind of thing happens. But yeah, it's a pretty cool one. Another fungal pseudoflower grows on blueberry species. And you can find this in the Pacific Northwest. And as you see, it changes the fruits to be bright white and mimic the flowers, which is interesting because there's a seasonal difference there. The fruits and the flowers aren't usually co-occurring in huge numbers. So if you're a pollinator looking for some late game pollen, you might be attracted to these, which produce volatiles and mimic the flowers. Pretty dang neat. If anyone has any questions, I'll stop after a certain category and take some questions. But yeah, this is one to look out for. It's not very commonly observed, but it's probably much more abundant than we think. So another category of plant mimicking fungi are Anthericolous fungi, so growing on the anthers of flowers. On the left here, you can see a zoom out, and at a distance, if you're like me and you're not a botanist, you might not even notice too much of a difference. You might think, wow, those are some hunky anthers. But up close, you find it's this fungus called Anthrospora growing on what is now Trichotema verna, which was previously Scilla verna. And you can see, look at how powdery it gets here, just sheer spore mass coming out of these. This one is, these pictures I think are from Ukraine, and they're found all over Russia, rest of Asia. And I'm curious if they grow here because they also grow on chickweed species, which we have some of. There is an astounding diversity of this. If you think of this as a unique one-off, which, I mean, you'd be in the right to assume it might be, there are at least 30 species of these. I'm not well versed in it, but looking at this while I was studying, yeah, there's at least 26 species of Mycobotrium alone, and probably a hefty diversity of Anthrospora as well. Pretty dang neat. Keep an eye out for them, especially if you're botanists or you have botanical friends doing surveys. You know, spread the word. It'd be pretty cool to know if these are out on the West Coast here, or wherever anyone's tuning in from, present or future. So, categories, trying to break some of these obscure things up into their general lifestyles. Plant dwellers. So there's a whole bunch of things to share, and I can only get a small sample of them that grow on plants in one way or another. And these are often misunderstood. They're things that we might assume are just strict pathogens. However, a lot of them don't seem to harm the plants much. Some of them definitely do, but a lot of them seem to be classified now as weak pathogens. They used to require, if you were importing plants, for some of these to be quarantined, like if the plant had some of these fungi I'm about to show, and we're finding out maybe that's something that's not always necessary. So an endophyte, if you aren't familiar with the term, is a fungus that lives inside of plants, and there are an astounding diversity. It is ubiquitous. To my knowledge, most all plants on Earth have endophytes. I'd be hard-pressed to find ones that don't, and they're in the leaves, different ones in the shoots, different ones in the roots. And so you can imagine there's just an astounding diversity. And some of these endophytes are just tourists from what people have learned, they just seem to be passing through and not be of much consequence. But others are playing critical roles inside plants' immune systems and immune defenses. A lot of qualities that are desirable are now being attributed to endophytes. In different crops, people are finding if you have endophytes, the crops are more drought resistant, heat resistant. And that wormhole goes even deeper because those endophytes can have viruses, mycoviruses, that also are attributed traits, like some mycoviruses might actually be the ones causing, through the endophyte, drought resistance. They're ubiquitous and overlooked, and I think in the next few decades of mycology, we'll just be relearning our fungal life cycles in terms of endophytes. Some common things you see that are endophytic, xylaria. Xylaria live in leaves in a life cycle called paraphytism, where when the leaves dry out, especially hardwood and more so in the tropics, when the leaves fall, they go onto the wood. And how they get back from the wood as wood decays into the plants is somewhat of a mystery, though I have heard some good ideas from smart people. So some plant dwellers. This one's called Hymenocate carpatica. And it might be endophytic, I'm not sure. We're learning now that, so the fungus, I get this is actually a hard one to see. This cracked material is a Hymenocate, which is a racupinate flat polypore that lives on the inside of living bark, which is a bizarre place to find a life. And how does it get there? It's a wonderful thing to think about. We know with some polypores that we have here in the Pacific Northwest that they actually can be found living asexually in grasses in prairies in the Southeast. So I think there's a lot of the story as far as polypore lifestyles that seem straightforward, but is yet to be told. This photo is by Nicholas Schwab, and I just want to thank Nicholas for some great recommendations for this talk and offering up photography. And a question mark here. I don't know if this is found here. So if you happen to be someone who enjoys looking on the inside of bark, which this is the only group I talk to where that might be the case, keep a lookout for Hymenocade, Carpatica, or similar fungi. Phylosticta gaultheriae. This is everywhere and hardly noticed. It's one of these endophytes that is considered a weak pathogen, especially when the plant, which is our salal, our Gaultheria chalon, especially when it gets stressed out, you'll see these white spots that look sort of like bird poop pop up on the leaves. And these little black structures are spreading spore-like structures called pycnidia. And they're actually really beautiful if you can look at them under the microscope, if anyone has that as a tool in their mycological experience. You can look and see, this is with lactophenol cotton blue dye, you can see their hyphal cells weaving through the tight junctions of the plant cells and finding a place to call home. In a single cell, they put a bunch of nutrients in there. These structures are called haustoria, typically. So there might be a more specific term for this kind of haustoria. If you cut right at the margin of where these things change color and look under the microscope, you might be lucky to get an image. Oh, I freeze up here. Can't seem to get my slides to go. Oh, there we go. You might be lucky to get an image like this, which just blew my mind. I put this under the scope before I even knew what it was. And this is just the fading out of different pigments inside the plant. So over here, we still have all of our chlorophyll. Chlorophyll fades and you start to see orange-yellow carotenoids. The orange-yellow carotenoids fade some and you start to see the melanized structures of the fungus and more maybe anthocyanin and some red compounds. And this is a blue dye that I put on there to help contrast, but really pretty, really unusual. It doesn't even have a name added in on iNaturalist yet, but keep a lookout for it because you'll start to see it's all over the place. So another category of plant dwellers are resinicolous fungi which live on the sap and the pitch of conifers around the world. One you can find here in the Pacific Northwest is Lachnolula resinaria, and it grows on this stick which has some sap oozing out of it, and they're really beautiful and also durable. These fungi will dry out and close up, and when rehydrated, open up again. And I had a similar species of Lachnolula on a log outside of my house, and I watched for an entire 5 months as it just died off, came back. So these are hardy fungi, and you can imagine they have to be to live on sap and pitch. That's what these plants are putting out to get rid of parasites and pathogens, if you will. So another one you can see here, very common right now. And if you look in your woods, especially with this drought, you will see a lot of these. This is Cerosope resinae, which is the same thing as Zithia resinae, but it is the asexual form. So we have in the past had previous different names for asexual forms and sexual forms, but they're becoming synonymized. And so Cerosope resinae was the old name, and I like it because it implies the growth form of being asexual. But look at this thing. It's bonkers. And you'd walk by this every day of the week and not take a look at a black spot on a hemlock tree. But it's pretty rewarding when you do and you get to know these small things. I'm curious if you could measure drought or plant stress using these, because it seems to me that in areas that are especially dried out, there's a lot more of this. However, I haven't been around too long to figure that out for sure, but keep an eye out on your own. So this is the asexual form. And then when it wants to reproduce sexually, it forms these little cups, Zithia resinae. And you can see this more in the fall, early winter. And the Cerosope, the asexual, you can see spring, summer, but now into our fall too. Yeah, and you can see here, this is just drying sap. And it's growing straight out of that sap. Here's for scale, that's a needle. Pretty dang small. Pretty dang cool. This one's very strange, and we might not have the right name for it, but this is the name used. So this predates on slime molds, myxomycetes, and it's called Polycephalomyces tomentosus. Myxomycete muncher is a good common name. I'm not sure if there are popular common names for this, but this is some sort of Trichia species or something in that family. And you can see it just grows in huge numbers right out of it. And this is very small, but something you might come across if you're looking at slime molds. Polycephalomyces, the rest of the genus, is known to grow on insects. My friend Connor Dooley, who a lot of his photos are in this, has told me. So sequencing needs to be done to see for sure if this is Polycephalomyces. And I have a culture in my fridge that hopefully will be used for that. So here's another photo of it, and you can see it grows on a diversity of slime molds, especially Trichiales. And what you're seeing on the right and the left here is that even if you can't see these big fruits, oftentimes if you put a slime mold under the microscope and you look at the outer layer or the calculus, which is a thing that holds the spore-bearing structure, you can actually see, even when the fruits aren't there, the hyphae of Polycephalomyces weaving through and making its way. It's pretty dang neat. Also, the slime mold looks like Starry Night under the microscope. Pretty dang cool. So just terms of where you can find this and some slime mold anatomy. So the capillicium is the net-like sometimes structure that holds the spores. And the outer layer, the peridium, which sometimes forms a cone-like structure at the base called the calculus. That's where you look for Polycephalomyces if you want to use a microscope to find it. Yeah, and the whole thing of the slime mold is called the Sporotheca. I didn't know there were different words to describe slime molds until recently, but here they are for you if you are curious about them. So there's a whole slew of fungi associated with sphagnum. And it looks like my slides are cutting off a little bit, but that's fine. You can see the letter. That's Cuphophilus cinerelis, and these pictures are both by Connor Dooley. And this is Hygrosope turunda. And there's a whole slew of fungi that just grow with sphagnum. You will find them nowhere else. There's a project on iNaturalist sharing all of the different sphagnum fungi, started by Connor there. And they're beautiful, often strange. I would just ask, if you do go looking for these fungi, be careful with that environment. With the sphagnum, it's something you can damage if you're not walking carefully and being mindful of it. Yeah, it's really baffling to me. These fungi, you won't find them anywhere in your forests, to our knowledge. You won't find their fruits anywhere. But all around the world, you'll see similar species popping up with sphagnum. And sphagnum is a unique kind of moss which retains a ton of moisture, changes the pH of its environment so much so that it selects out everything except for a suite of organisms. Yeah, beautiful. I love these. Another one you'll see with sphagnum is this tiny dot, which I can't believe is an entire organism doing its thing. This is called Bisinella schimperi. And it just baffled me when I saw this on Facebook. It was shared. Yeah, it grows on the tips of this Sphagnum squarosum, which is a very common and somewhat easy to identify sphagnum moss. Most sphagnum are not, and this is it microscopically. That little dot is doing its business and producing its spores. Any questions at this point? Stop for a second. Nope.
Just Jack. Matt, you have a question?
Can you go back to that slide with the little tan spheres and the white fingers coming out of it?
Yeah.
I don't know what scale I'm looking at here.
Oh, okay, yeah. It would be useful to include scale. Let's see if there's anything in here. This is right here, a single piece of moss. These are each maybe 3-4 millimeters across, each little ball. So these are no taller than, 8 millimeters, probably smaller than that. But this is fingertip naturalism here. These are small things.
Thank you. Other questions? That's all the questions for now, Jack.
Okay. Yeah, and I can mention more of the scale. That's something that's easily lost in the world of photography that I often forget about. And it's nice when you can include something to help people understand what they're looking at, because you don't know where to look if you don't know what size the thing is. Thanks for that. I've heard there's questions on the YouTube channel, Chris. Would you be able to read those to me?
No, we don't have access to that. So we're only questions from the audience in person.
Okay, I can look those up and get to them at the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So Fungicolous, fungi-loving, fungi munchers, things that predate on other fungi. This is Squamanita, which is a wonderful name. I love it. It haunts it forms the nightmares of most fungi. And what you're seeing here is, this is the Squamanita, and they're called body snatchers. It has grown straight out of the stipe of another mushroom, parasitizing it to make its own spores. This is rarely observed, and it's beautiful. So these two species have not been documented, to my knowledge, in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe they have, but there is a species you can look for here that has been found by my friend Connor. Once again, I have to give him a lot of credit because I just used his beautiful photos. This is Squamanita fimbriata, and it's growing out of some deformed Cuernomyces, which might be the sheath tuft mushroom, something of the sort. They're lookalikes for honey mushrooms. But yeah, keep an eye out for these. They're just bonkers to think that they can do this. And the question I love to put in people's heads when I'm on walks or teaching is, how did it get there? I don't know. Okay, looks like the top of the slide's cut out here. I wonder why that's happening. I've never had that happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a photo by Ethan Crenson from Pennsylvania or New York, I believe. And you can't even see what he's showing us yet. So if you zoom way into the trichoblossom here, which is a slightly hairy earth tongue, you can see these tiny dots. And these actually are an entire organism. They're called Gelatinopsis. Gelatinopsis farlowi is the one that predates or parasitizes these trichoblossom. And I love this zoom in here. Incredible microscopy by Luis Quijada. If you zoom in, you can see these individual pustules. Zoom in further in a beautiful bisection. You can see the individual Gelatinopsis. A whole fruit body, and it's only the size of a few spores of the trichoblossom. And it forms around these hairs or setae that pop out from the trichoblossom. And over here is my photo. It's one of these things where I'd have to look at it under the microscope to be sure, but I found this a few weeks ago in a bog, and I might have Gelatinopsis on here. You can see it's not looking so hairy, it's looking more pustuled, but it could just be sphagnum moss. But if you find trichoblossom and you have a hand lens, this is something to keep an eye out for. Trichoblossom, they themselves will be up to 8 centimeters, maybe long, usually smaller, or no, around that size, or even a little bigger, actually. Doing my inches to centimeters here. But yeah, beautiful. Keep an eye out for it. If this is Gelatinopsis, this would be the first observation from the West Coast. And yeah, really wild. What a good name too, Gelatinopsis. So here are next a suite of species which grow on russulas. So there's a group of russulas that turn dark black when they mature, and they just kind of stick around. And they are the host for a whole bunch of fungi. I can't say slew again. There are five or six species that grow on these in the Pacific Northwest. And this right here is Dendrocolibia racemosa. And at the base here, you can see this black mess, which is an old russula. And inside that russula, there were little beans, which are the sclerotia, which is like a potato, like a storehouse for the fungus. And out of that sprouts these fruits of Dendrocolibia. And this is a unique species, not only because it lives inside of russulas, but because the cap here makes sexual spores, but simultaneously asexual spores are being made here. And that's actually a trait that's found in a few different species that grow on russulas, which is pretty neat, the production of asexual spores as well as sexual spores. There's a second species of this called Dendrocolibia pycnoramella, if I've got that right, that grows on the same thing, blackening russula, and we haven't seen it more than once, and that's a name, a provincial name, so that species hasn't even been formally described, but something to keep a lookout because it's just bonkers. And these can be anywhere from 2 inches to sometimes half a foot tall, which is very, very tall for these, but this is a particularly big fruiting. Colibia tuberosa is another one that grows on blackening russulas. You know what? My partner's watching and she has the YouTube pulled up. Hey, Lauren, would you come downstairs and show me the YouTube questions? She'll be here in a second. So here's Colibia tuberosa. This is very common, and it grows out of these nice little lentils, and it's called the lentil shanklet, which is an adorable name. Again, sclerotia. And they'll form in the blackening russulas and get to a good size. But when you find them very small, also this is Tim Sage's photo, thanks for letting me use it. When you find them very small, they can be just adorable and tiny. And this is, few millimeters, not too big at all. My partner Lauren is here with the questions from the YouTubes. All right. So could Taphrina be construed as a pseudoflower? What's Taphrina again? From Dylan Taylor, my friend who's on his weddingish honeymoon, sort of a honeymoon. Shout out to Mead and Dylan. Congratulations.
Molly says it's called alder tongue.
Alder tongue. I'm spacing, but I'll look it up and get back to you. That's a cool question. Are there any ideas about the evolutionary pathway into such complex adaptation? The pseudoflower formation, I assume, is what you're talking about. A lot of these predate or pathogens on plants, and that's a great question. I mean, it's really up to your imagination how these can happen. There are pathogens that focus themselves in the flowers and in the fruits, and I think one way that comes to my mind is lateral gene transfer. Perhaps some happy time in history, accidentally the genes to produce the volatiles were transferred to the fungus. That'd be something to investigate. It could be done with sequencing. And then the next question: volatile compounds, are the pathways novel or stolen from the host? From Damon Ty. I don't know, Damon. Someone should look. That'd be great. Taphrina is, wow. So it turns the leaves of, those are alder, you said, quite red. It's possible. I think what you'd need to do to understand the ecology of that, Dylan, is again, look for volatiles. Look for volatiles, look for UV activities, anything that you could attribute to changing the behaviors of insects around it. Let's see, Resquamanita. There are actually, Connor, a few species described from the Pacific Northwest, and the species or the specimen I showed right here is of a stunted dry specimen. Though some of them that were really nice were found by Mary's Peak. That's so cool. So there are native species to keep an eye out for as well. Thanks for that. Okay, and another one that grows on these blackening russulas, Asterophora lycopodoides. And this is another example of a fungus which I recently learned has a powdery cap where mitotic asexual propagules are produced. Really cool, really neat. And you'll see this one if you look for it. And if you don't stop to stare at black blobs on the ground, you probably won't find it. Yeah, there's another Asterophora as well that occurs in North America, Asterophora parasiticum or parasitica. And here's another picture of a younger Asterophora to keep an eye out for it. If it's bright white like this, it's also an Asterophora. And so underneath that cap, there's like a gelatinous layer that is slightly wrinkled, and it's not quite gills, but it's maybe something that's losing the functionality of spore dispersal, active spore dispersal. Tuberculina sbrosii. Yeah, you know, I've never tried to say an S, B, and R all at once. But so what you're seeing here is a plant that was infected with a rust, like the rust I showed you that is a fungal pseudoflower. And that rust then has a secondary fungus that attacks it, and life on life on life. Just a pretty cool one. I put a question mark here. I don't know if this is documented from here. It's one of those things that could be in some herbarium somewhere and cryptically recognized, but I'm not sure. Question from Damon Ty in the YouTube. What is the pressure that causes sexual and asexual spore production on the black russula parasites? That's a great question. I think you and I had similar trains of thought. I saw Damon commenting. It could be that the ability to get to the and grow into the russulas is a trait that is, once it's done, it's so successful, you don't want to lose it. So once you have a very specific niche that is hard to occupy by another fungus, perhaps it's something that the pressures to stay the same become greater. And maybe you could also ask, why are there still sexual spores? And if there's a diversity of blackening russula, maybe there is some specificity genetically to those species. Maybe not, but keeping some plasticity and getting rid of some at the same time optimizes your chance of staying in that niche, maybe. But that's up to anybody's guess, really. Cool question to research. Okay, so we're on to entomopathogenic fungi, and there's so many cordyceps out there. And I want to clarify, cordyceps is a name that people use to refer to fungi that predate on insects or are related to the fungi that prey on insects. However, there is a genus, Cordyceps. So it's one of those terms that has a cultural meaning and is a common name, but is also a scientific name. And seen here is the carpenter ant on a Formica species here, Ophiocordyceps, Aph myrmecophylla, and the Aph meaning that it has been sequenced by Richard Tehan and maybe others, a researcher out of Oregon, and found to be a different species than the traditional Ophiocordyceps myrmecophylla. And this was found by Benjamin Funkhauser and photographed by Lauren Ray here. So there, even though we think of these cordyceps as quite exotic, they're things you can find here at home. And another example of that is Gibellula species. They parasitize spiders primarily, or maybe only to my knowledge, but definitely on spiders. And these are, again, very small spiders, under a centimeter. And if you're looking underneath the foliage of plants on the forest floor, especially in the summertime, but throughout spring and fall, you can find these little cordyceps growing out of these spiders. And it takes a little bit of time, and I'm not the best at finding them, but I did succeed and find one earlier this year. Yeah, baffling. These are, if spiders give us nightmares, these give spider nightmares. There's probably a diversity of them, and they aren't well categorized or studied. People who know more can put them to species, but I cannot. Beautiful and creepy. If you're not into insects, you might get a drink of water right now. This is not your time. And this is from the tropics. This is in Trinidad, Torubiella species, which again is a catch-all for fungi that predate on very large huntsman spiders. So you will see in the forest these huge, and I'm talking, 6 inches across, maybe even bigger, spiders that have been totally parasitized and are white and crusty with this fungus. They're one of those things that if you live in a tropical place and you do naturalism, you probably won't get too excited, because once these are parasitized, you'll see them in the same area on the trail for weeks, even a month. They'll just endure, which is a feat if you consider how moist the jungle is and how quick other things decay. I managed to capture right here, the spider had just molted and then looks to be completely engulfed by the Torubiella, which maybe the Torubiella forced it to molt. Maybe it opportunistically comes out of the spider and grows all around it when it molts. This guy just looks kind of silly. I know it's creepy, but what an odd growth form there. So I don't think you will see these in the Pacific Northwest, but we have our Gibbolulas, and maybe they're here. I don't know. Cordyceps tenuipes on Spilosoma, Virginia tiger moths. So this is the fuzzy woolly bear caterpillars you see coming around, especially this time of year. And Cordyceps tenuipes is a sort of catch-all name for the asexual form of cordyceps. And these structures are spreading asexual spores. And these were found on the same trail in the same day by a fellow named Graham Steinruck. And you can see here, it's parasitizing the pupa. And in another instance, it's parasitizing the actual caterpillar. Looks like cauliflower's growing out of it. Pretty bonkers. These have been studied for metabolic activity. There are some interesting compounds they produce. As you imagine, they might need to take over a host and at times manipulate behavior in pretty amazing ways. And even the cordyceps themselves, can have parasites growing on them. This was identified by Connor Dooley via a grainy FaceTime call from Trinidad and Tobago, which baffled my mind. But again, it illustrates, if you know what to look for, if you know the niches that are out there, you can find more interesting fungi you'd overlook. So this is a hyperparasite of Ophiocordyceps dipterygina species group that grows on flies. And you can see it's engulfed what normally looks like a club-like structure, and all these things are growing off of it. I tried to culture this and bring it back for Connor, but I cultured some contamination, so yet unknown what the identity is. Connor has a name that it might be, but pretty cool. Life on life on life on life. A fungus on an insect on a plant. Another one that's extremely common in Guyana are these Hypocrella species. So these are on scale insects, and there's an astounding diversity of forms and shapes and interesting pigments that they produce. And right here, these are sexual structures, parathecia, that formed at the border of this particular one. Coming in from the YouTube, some expertise. Someone says spiders are at their most vulnerable during molts, and they lost their 13-year-old tarantula recently due to a bad molt. Rest in peace, Zora 578's tarantula. Torubiella is a teleomorph name. Gibbelula is an anamorph. So back to these for clarification. This is the asexual name for spider parasitizing cordyceps, and the Gibbelula is the Oh no, my bad. The Terubiella is the sexual name, the animal or teleomorph, and the Gibellula is the anamorph name. Gibellula is the name that takes priority. So says Connor Dooley. Thanks for that. Learning as we go. Yeah, again, these are species Hypocrella. If you go to the tropics, you'll see tons of different shapes and colors and forms, but you won't see them unless you stop to pick up leaves and stare. You might get lucky and find one otherwise. This is Hesperomyces virescens group, so there might be multiple species on Harmonia, on lady beetles, ladybugs. These are in the group Labuobenniales, which I learned about at a Cascade Myco talk. And they form these interesting structures on the legs and the body and the heads, even all over really, of these beetles. And as of now, they're not thought to do very much damage, but they do seem to change if they're in huge abundance. They're cumbersome. There's a season for these in the early summer, around then, midsummer. You can keep a lookout if you see lady beetles, and you might get lucky and find these. Something fascinating about Labuobenniales, which there's a lot fascinating about them, is we don't know how they do. We don't know how their ecology works, how they get energy, even as simple as, are they feeding directly on the insects or on a film on the insects? They have some pretty neat work done on them, but they're still a work in progress. Absolutely cool. Beetle STDs. So as I was talking about interesting molecules coming from cordyceps, this is a cordyceps on truffles, a truffle parasite called Polypocladium capitatum on Elaphomyces, which is called the deer truffle. And if you see these in the woods, dig, and you'll find a truffle they're attached to. I believe an organ transplant drug, cyclosporin or something close to that, was created by folks studying Polypocladium, if I have my story right. And what's interesting about this, I guess these are related to cordyceps, but these truffles, something interesting about them is they're in the Eurotiales, which is an order that has like penicillium in it. So they're closer related to your fridge molds than a lot of other truffles, which are in the Pezizales very often, but other groups as well. Nematode trapping fungi. So we talked about insect predation in a very traditional sense. And here's a way that's a little more obscure. To my knowledge, there are 3 genera in the family Pleurotaceae, one that's described out of Africa, and I can't recall the name of it, but 2 of those genera, Hohenboehlia and Pleurotus, are known to create little structures in their hyphae that trap nematodes. So they temporarily parasitize, immobilize the nematodes, and then they're engulfed. So your oyster mushrooms that you see, part of what makes them so successful is they have multiple strategies. They aren't just decaying wood. They're decaying nematodes, and at that, a very specific type of nematodes. I can't recall which, but there are types of nematodes that the Pleurotus eat, and then there are types of nematodes that eat the Pleurotus. And nematodes and fungi have been at war since at least, I think it's 20 million years ago. They are one of the only fungi that we have really great amber data on. There was a finding of a fungus closely related to, or somewhat related to Orbigliaceae species, preserved in amber. And we can see that that's been going on for a long time through fossil records. And so again, Orbelia, you might see these little cups, you might know them and love them. You might not know them at all, but these are, no bigger than 6-8 millimeters, maybe even smaller, often smaller. And they also are insect or nematode trapping, which aren't insects, they're worms, nematode trapping fungi. And they produce a little loop. And that loop, when a nematode swims through it, it inflates and catches the nematode. Nematode consumption by fungi has evolved at least 3 times separately, which goes to show that it's a very successful strategy. It's, again, something that we get to through multiple lineages. So fungi that predate on insects, fungi that depend on insects. Here's an example of a fungus which, for a long time, its ecology was a total mystery. Well, not too long, but it was described, and at that time, its ecology was a total mystery. It's called Gyanagaster necrorhizis, and it has its spores spread by termites. That work was done by Rachel Koch, Kathy Aim, and the species description was done by Kathy Aim and Terry Henkel, probably Rachel Koch as well, down in Guyana, hence the name. And this fungus, depends on termites to get its spores moved around. And the relationship between termites and ants and fungi is multifaceted. There are fungi that predate on ants, and there are fungi that break down the old nests of ants and termites. Here you can see Geastrum schweinitzii, I think, or close, and a Tarula species growing on old abandoned ant nests. I think they're ant nests. Could be termites, but I think they're ant nests. And this is something you'll see in the tropics. Insects have moved out, left a lot of nitrogen, left a lot of stuff that needs to be broken down, partially chewed up perhaps by the enzymes of the termites or the chewing and enzymes of the ants. So this is a niche that's actually there's lots of diversity. Some more photos by Lauren Ray. Lauren, what's that one? Is that a Chimenophyllum? My partner's a mycologist, that one. I can't recall that one, but it's growing on insect nests, more Tarula species. She thinks it might be a Crepidotus. Yeah. Growing on insect nests. It's really, really baffling. The specificity, the diversity and the specificity, it never ceases to amaze. Termites and Trichoderma species. So Trichoderma, there's many different kinds, and we know them also as their sexual forms, hypocrea. Some hypocrea will grow on polypores. There's a whole bunch of things that grow on polypores, but with this Trichoderma sulfurum, it was found that, well, what I found was if I try to collect this in the tropics and I put my hand near it, I will get bit by termites or ants or some insects. And that's because it's closely associated with insects. In the tropics, they found that when this Trichoderma is present, there's a smaller chance, a lessened chance of the insects being predated on by other cordyceps. So this is a fungus working with an insect to protect against a fungus that wants to predate on the insect. And then the rabbit hole goes even further, where there are fungi that are being cultivated by the ants. So get rid in your head, if you can, or transform the term leafcutter ants into fungus farming ants. When you see these ants bringing the leaves somewhere, they're not eating them themselves. They are chewing them, partially digesting them, maybe even fermenting, I don't know. But they're breaking them down and feeding them to a fungus which grows in their nests. And this is a 50 million year old relationship. There are fungus farming ants that will be partially dependent on fungi. There are ants that are totally dependent on fungi and can't produce some necessary amino acids on their own anymore. So they're hooked on the stuff. They love it. And those fungi often don't even fruit anymore. They don't have a mushroom that we see, but they'll be in the nests forming these interesting structures, these big carbohydrate-rich, I imagine, structures called gonglidia, which is a really fun name to say. say it out loud to yourself at home if you have the chance right now. It's a good one. It's a good one. But yeah, this not only are they cultivating fungi, but they cultivate fungi in the Agaricales, and I believe in Agaricaceae. And to the non-taxonomists, that means the ants decided to grow a bunch of things related to our button mushrooms. So independently, we have convergently evolved to choose a similar fungus to eat as our main fungus as the ants did, which I would say means that we made a good choice because insects got things going on that I don't understand. I'll stop and take questions again, Chris, if there are any from the active lecture.
Questions?
So what species of Agaricus mushrooms do the leafcutter ants grow? That's very cool.
You know, I can't remember what the epithet is. And I don't remember. So I chose my words carefully as to not misinform. I know it's in Agaricaceae, which has our Agaricus, but I don't recall what species. Oh, my partner looked it up. Leucoagaricus gongliferus is the most commonly documented species. So, yeah.
We have another question.
Is there science to be done or discoveries to be made, like inside of neighborhoods and cities, the parks and schoolyards, and just landscaping and species that are used in landscaping?
There is science to be done anywhere there are living organisms. Absolutely. I know of quite a few naturalists who have just done a lot of their looking around and discovering in parks, you know. Take, for instance, in my town in Bellingham, Washington, you know, someone decided to sequence a chicken of the woods growing on a prunus species, I don't remember if it was a cherry or a plum. I think it was a plum. And they found that the species growing was the one we thought grew on conifers. There have been instances where people have found new species in flower pots, maybe even a new genus in one instance. There are, yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, is there anything you're interested in? Maybe we could point you towards something in specific, or?
Yeah, I've got a whole playground full of third graders who are running out of grasshoppers to feed to their praying mantis, who I think is about to die anyway. So if you have any slides you want to send me, I can show them, and they'll find some stuff.
Okay, you mean as to grow, just looking to find fungi for them? How do you mean?
Yeah, if they're like the things you were showing earlier that might be found around here in the Pacific Northwest, if there are any photographs of things that they might look for, they could find bugs with mushrooms growing out of them, or they'll find crazy weird things. They're really keen-eyed, and they're down on the ground. So yeah,
absolutely,
for real. Send me some pictures.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put my emails at the end. Just send me an email to remind me. But yeah, I mean, take your kids near a creek. Definitely educate them on how to pick things. That being, don't eat things randomly. But that shouldn't be hard at third grade. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that. There's some educators in the crowd too who might have ideas. So birds and fungi. There is interesting coevolution. In the tropics, you can find fungi that, again, don't even make sexual fruits. They don't make mushrooms anymore, but you'll find them all over the place. This here is called Bruniocorticium cornifora, and I don't know if there's a common name, but I wish there was. Maybe the bird nest fungus. So there's a lot of pressure in these tropics with so many things going on the forest floor to grow up. There's a lot of safety and better spore dispersal if you get off the forest floor a little bit. And so these fungi, Bruniocorticium and others, have evolved to have their rhizomorphs be used by birds. So rhizomorphs are these root-like structures, specialized fungal structures that the birds will come and pick up, weave into their nest, and then in instances, with some Marasmia species, the mushrooms will actually fruit out of the nest. Brunio corticium does not have a mushroom fruiting out of its net when it's in nests, from our knowledge, but it gets used and then it gets spread and it grows and it grows. Lichens are also commonly used by birds, which makes good sense if you take into consideration that lichens are a warehouse of antimicrobial compounds. So when you see birds lining their nests with mosses, with lichens, or if you're somewhere with these fungi with rhizomorphs, they have co-evolved to maintain their microbial conditions in their nest by bringing fungi and mosses into the equation. And without these birds dispersing these fungi would have no game anymore. That's their whole bet, to our knowledge, is being dispersed by birds. So another fungal bird relationship, Onagenia corvina. This is Travis Kripling's photo, and there are fungi that break down feathers, which is a really interesting thing to imagine. Where did that come from? This is an ascomycotin, and we know there's a lot of diversity of ascomycotins as you go back in the fossil record. And I have really wanted to see this, and I also just can't help but imagine that this may have evolved during the time of dinosaurs. That's total spitball, but if you think about the differences between bird keratin and mammal keratin, it's a propelling thought, because they actually are arranged quite differently and require different enzymes to break them down. So perhaps way back when our feathered dinosaurs were squawking around, there were ancestors or others of Onagenia and ascomycotins breaking down the feathers. That's just imagination on my part, but it's a fun thought. Here's Connor's photo again. This is one, the star may have gotten left off here, but you can look for this in the Pacific Northwest. Please do, it's really cool. So oddballs to wrap it up. I only have a handful here left for you. Cladosporium cladosporioides is a fungus that can make its living in conditions unimaginable. This thing can survive in jet fuel, and as well as usually when you see fungi in jet fuel or bacteria or archaea, you'll see them in a thing called a consortium. So a whole bunch of microbes will form at the surface where water precipitates on top of the fuel, and the fuel itself is. And at that exact little surface boundary, the chemistry is right for some of them to make a living, but only in the presence of each other very often. Cladosporium, I do not know if it functions in a consortium, but it can be found in jet fuel. I imagine there's similar species found in sulfur or diesel, pardon me, diesel tanks. It's a problem in commercial fishing in Alaska that I know of, where people who don't check on their tanks and get water in their fuel will have this scum grow on the top of their fuel. That doesn't mean these things are going to break down all of our pollution. That's a whole nother discussion, but it does mean that there is no unoccupied niche. It reinforces that to me more than anything. A scale insect here. You know what? I can't even see the name of this anymore. Nick Schwab recommended this to me, but I can't recall what it is. Oh well. This is a it's got a really long name. It's like Septosporidium or something of the sort. This is a fungus that farms scale insects. I'm not embarrassed to forget a name. There's too many to remember. So this fungus has a relationship, and as do quite a few fungi in the tropics and elsewhere, where it will create a little layer that scale insects will be, or other insects will live in, and it'll be like a nursery where the fungus will eat the excretions and the dead insects, and in return, the insects have a safe place to live. Pretty bonkers. So I think this might be my last fungus to share, but just another example of being rewarded by looking closely. Some of you have already seen this. Chytridiomycotans are a phyla, which is a very high taxonomic ranking of fungi, which are most famously known to predate on frogs, and they have caused the extinction of frog species. Chytridiomycosis caused by bacodendritis or something of the sort. Chytrids occasionally parasitize frogs. More than that, they're decomposers. They can be found everywhere on Earth. They can be found in Antarctica, in the ditch on the side of a road, in soils, and very often in water. And apparently, for reasons I don't fully understand, they are drawn to hair-like structures. Culturing chytrids can be successful if you use thin, small human hairs, some animal hairs. And I found, when I was trying to identify this Scutellaria, also in fungal hairs, there are chytrids that can hang out. Pretty dang strange world we got here with all these things to look for. So this is a oogonium, a structure of the chytrid, and these are oospores or resting spores, which hang out and wait for proper conditions in order to fruit. Yeah, and there are a million other niches I could share with you, but I could only pick a handful to make this talk somewhat reasonably length. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, I'll take them now. Yeah, appreciate you guys having me.
Jack? It looks like you've answered every question possible in the audience here.
Live applause through a Zoom call. That's new. Cool. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack. And we'll be in touch by email to compensate you for this great presentation. Thanks a lot for filling in.
Thanks so much. Okie dokie. Have a good night.